At a conference like this, one often gets surprised. And one of my surprises was to moderate a panel that a longtime dear friend is on. So now I get to introduce a longtime dear friend. The last member of the panel will be Nancy Dorsinville, who is now the Senior Policy Advisor at the UN Office of the Special Envoy to Haiti. So Nancy, good to see you.
It's really good to be here. I think the very fact that we're assembled here today and that it's a big room and it's full of people from the media, people from the community, people from the academia, it in itself dispels this impression that a year and a half later people have forgotten about Haiti. So this is testimony to the contrary. This is dispelling a myth. And it means a great deal to me as a Haitian and as someone who happened to have arrived in Haiti on the very day of the earthquake. Of course, we didn't know it was going to happen. I arrived a couple of hours before. We were 8. 3 of us made it. 5 did not. And I was supposed to be there for what I thought was going to only be 24 hours. My first meeting a couple of hours after arriving was a Global Fund meeting, which Jon knows a lot about, having lived through the first days of the pandemic with us in Haiti, where it was mentioned earlier by the poet Kwame Dawes that it was really such a triumph for us to really overcome not only the stigma that Haiti endured as the one ethnic group of one of the 4H, but also numerically, statistically, having had such a turnaround from having been the one country in the hemisphere with the highest incidence to really, in a relatively short time, changing those statistics in terms of incidence and prevalence. But somehow this all comes together. Because in Haiti, it's all part of a continuum of crisis, continuum of challenge, but also continuum of coming through and making a difference by whatever is available and in partnership with a range of people, such as the people in this audience. I go back to some of the tensions that have always existed in humanitarian response and the media, and I think most of you will remember this picture, which has become kind of an icon of that tension, and what does it mean to do true reporting, whether it's the hibiscus or the mound. What is it to really tell the story to save the one kid with tetanus versus 500 kids or a whole population? And what does it mean to share that and to make an impression that will compel people to respond not only for the immediate but also for the long term? I can't say I'm a Mac person. I'm just not an IT person. Those tensions, I think, in honor of my friend of public health, is not just about humanitarian response and media, even for us. And I mentioned the AIDS epidemic, which in many ways shaped who I've become as an adult, as a public health person, and as an advocate. Because in the early days of the AIDS epidemic, we lived once again the long-standing tension between public health and human rights in terms of transmission, in terms of partner notification, informed consent for pre-test counseling, post-test counseling, and so forth. And those things have always been there. But I think in terms of good outcome and positive, inspiring stories is that, health and human rights now have really done the partnership that I hope will, in many ways, lead the way for what this kind of discussion hopefully will yield in terms of the still very present tension between the media and first responders and responders in general. I start out with the National Palace. The National Palace, I think, in many ways, is such an icon of the complexity of who we are. I mean, this palace itself was rebuilt about 4 times in 140 years because of coup d'etat, because of other natural disasters. And each time it was rebuilt, and each time we kept going, and we restructured, and we prevailed. And so, again, I start with the palace because in many ways, that picture was all over the media, and that picture became a symbol of the destruction of the seat of power in Haiti. But what struck me and what struck many Haitians is that when the foreign press came, they started referring to it as the presidential palace. And I don't want to go into a lot of semantics and word and their implication and connotation and all of that. But I think the distinction between what we call it, which is National Palace, versus the fact that people were coming in, well-intended people were coming in and calling it the Presidential Palace. And I want to share a little anecdote, which is that in the early 1900s, just at the turn of the century, and there are a lot of similarities architecturally between the palace and the White House. And there was some American dignitary who came and he said, "But this is so much bigger than the White House." And we Haitians, or my ancestors, it was at the turn of the century, politely said, "Yes, yours is a house, ours is a palace." And going back to this notion of the nuance between presidential palace versus national palace is the sense of ownership, the sense of belonging, and the sense of the relationship that we have with the monuments. And so when people come and begin the discourse, begin the dialogue with something that may seem quite banal, it sets the tone. It sets the tone for a sense of familiarity, equality, complementarity, and who are you listening to, and who are you here for? And so, again, arrow button, okay. Okay. Oh, okay, fine. And in terms of connecting, what is it that is being reported accurately? What is it that's being reported with integrity? What is it that's being reported with the best of intent? And what does it mean in terms of what is being portrayed and the connections that are really significant and relevant to the reality of the people on the ground, and which has been and continues to be a challenge in the way the Haiti disaster has been portrayed by the media. This happens to be our nursing school, the oldest nursing school in Haiti. And I chose that in part because I realized that this was a mixed group, not only media people, but public health people, and because I'm a public health person myself. And because this, I think, in many ways illustrates what the priority of the documentation was. Was it about the physical destruction? Was it about how gory it was? And again, in your poem about the tombs, it was always about every picture like this, every illustration like this, every statement like this really was a tomb, because in every one of those piles of rubbles, there were people. There were people who had died. There were people who had waited against all odds to be rescued, who had texted, who had called, who had screamed, and people who had very strong hopes of somehow, as a Haitian, to overcome yet this other disaster. And yet that's only part of the story. What does it mean when one of 4 nursing schools in the country, the biggest, the oldest, is completely crushed? What does it mean that a whole class of midwives, which is only 35 for a population of about 10 million people, just dies? What does it mean that in a country where you have a ratio of 1 doctor for every 11,000 people, or 11 nurses for every 100,000 people, that the nursing school dies? What does it mean that 25% of the rural part of the country, which is primarily rural, don't have schools, and everybody who wants their kids to have a decent education sends them to Port-au-Prince, and that most of the schools in Port-au-Prince are destroyed? What does it mean when we have one of the highest illiteracy rates in the hemisphere? What does it mean when we have one of the most fragile healthcare systems in the world, and the highest maternal infant mortality in the hemisphere? So is it about just this building? Is it about the many teachers and students who died in that building? What are the connecting factors, and how is the event? What is it that the long sustainable outcome of this picture mean for the people of Haiti? And how does the media, as a tool, as a partner, can contribute to what are the implications, what are the priorities? I learned. There are many challenges that we as Haitians had to deal with during the early days. The airport, the main airport was destroyed. Our country was destroyed. 1.5 million people were internally displaced. And yet there was a deluge of people who were coming with good intentions. Some people, some rescue teams came in the early days with their bare hands. They came, they were present, and that counts for a lot. But they assumed so much. I remember one French rescue team in particular, not to single out the French, but they said we need someone to go to the local fire station and get us ladders and ropes. Fire stations, plural? Hello, we have one that's barely equipped, and I had to go to my family's home and get alcohol for the general hospital because we had no alcohol. And so when people come and they have the gentleman from the boat, and he said, well, people came without malaria medication. Well, this is still very much part of the same challenge, that people need to respond not only to the crisis, but at the same time manage the media. And so I felt somewhat validated that he had brought up that point. The media coming in and expecting immediate response, and that varies. Someone brought up the fact that print media has a very different time response, and it's true. Whether there were people who came with all kinds of filming equipment and who needed something sensational for that evening, or people who could build on a story over time, or people like 60 Minutes who had until Sunday night to produce something. And that in many ways colored the exchange with the people on the ground who were at the general hospital, who were in the field hospitals. It also put a lot of pressure on the ministries. The Ministry of Communication most of the ministries were completely destroyed. 60% of the infrastructure of government was destroyed. A third of the public service was destroyed. This is in a place where everything is already fragile, where everything is already in the most vulnerable state. And so after the earthquake, the Ministry of Communication, they were operating under a tree. So the media is coming and saying, well, we need this, we want that, we want to see the president. We want to see this person. We want to, and everything has to be done right away, and everything is in order, and everything is immediate. So that's a real challenge. And there were times when officials had to respond on the spot, and then it became a decree, it became a policy, because you didn't want to seem incompetent, you didn't want to seem ignorant. After all, you have all this stigma already attached to being Haitian. So you make a decision without the analytical tools that you would necessarily need to make that kind of decision. And then how do you retract it? And those decisions impact on people's lives. The media has been very good. I mean, there were times when the media was even critiqued because, for example, the telethon, some people said that, we got as much time as the State of the Union address, and that, all the stations were doing the telethon for Haiti. And that is something that was positive, and that is positive because a lot of these benefits are still coming through and being used for life-sustaining activities and programs. I want to end with this picture. This picture is a very complex, very hard picture for me. This picture won the UNICEF award before the earthquake, and it's a picture of Cité Soleil. And it tells the truth. It tells the truth and the whole truth about the reality of the dollar-a-day people, the poorest ghetto in the Western Hemisphere people, the ongoing complex humanitarian emergency people, the post-hurricane people, and now the earthquake and cholera people. But look at her. Look at how she's dressed in the midst of squalor. There is energy. There is vitality in her. Look at her gaze. Look at her gait. She's purposeful. Look at that dress. This is by any standard anywhere in the world. This is her Sunday best, and her feet are in water. It tells the story. It tells the story of our resilience. It tells the story of our determination, and it tells the story of what we will continue to fight for, which is our dignity, and which is something that hopefully the media will recognize and continue to tell, but something that we will challenge by the very way in which we overcome whatever it is, whether natural or economic or political, given Haiti. Thank you.